Hi, everybody. I hope that you enjoyed reading Chapter 3 of our novel of Mice and Men. We learned last week about literary points of view in class, specifically that our story of Mice and Men is written from the third person omniscient point of view. And so that means that the narrator in this text knows the whereabouts of all of the characters and also the feelings and thoughts of the different characters. And the narrator might not always tell us what everybody's thinking all the time, but we do get some sort of insight into how each of the characters thinks and operates. At the beginning of chapter 4, we're focused on Crooks, who we know about, but we don't know that much about him. So I'm going to read a little section, and as I'm reading, I want you to think about how Crooks' lifestyle causes him to act and speak the way that he does. Crooks, the Negro stable buck, had had his bunk in the harness room, a little shed that leaned off the wall of the barn. On one side of the little room, there was a square, four-paned window, and on the other, a narrow plank door leading into the barn. Crooks's bunk was a long box filled with straw, on which his blankets were flung. On the wall, by the window, there were pegs on which hung broken harness in the process of being mended, strips of new leather, and under the window itself, a little bench for leather working tools, curved knives, and needles and balls of linen thread, and a small hand riveter. On pegs were also pieces of harness, a split collar with the horsehair stuffing sticking out, a broken hame, and a trace chain with its leather covering split. Crooks had had his apple box over his bunk, and in it a range of medicine bottles, both for himself and for the horses. Okay, so just to pause there, we know a few things about Crooks coming into chapter 4. The first thing that we know is that Crooks is different from the rest of the guys because he's black. And they refer to him in the story as Negro. They refer to him as nigger, but we generally can understand that the rest of the guys that he's working with are likely white and that he is the only black character. His specific job on the ranch is that he's a stable buck. We remember that the stable buck is the person that is in charge of caring for the horses. And so he cares for the horses on the ranch. That's why we see that he's trying to mend harnesses, and that there are collars, and that there's horsehair, and that he has medicine bottles for himself and for the horses, because it's his job to take care of them. I'm going to keep describing a little bit more about the way that Crooks lives so that we can get an understanding of how that might influence his actions and his thoughts. There were cans of saddle soap and a drippy can of tar with its paintbrush sticking over the edge, and scattered about the floor were a number of personal possessions. For being alone, Crooks could leave his things about, and being a stable buck and a cripple, he was more permanent than the other men, and he had accumulated more possessions than he could carry on his back. Now we remember that the reason that Crooks can't carry things on his back is because his back is crooked. It's in some way caused him to be disabled, and he can't operate like other people can. So not only is Crooks the only black person amongst all of these individuals that he's working with, but also we find that he is physically disabled. And now, as I'm reading through the description of where he lives, it says, for being alone, Crooks could leave his things about. So we also find that Crooks lives by himself. All the other guys get to live in a bunkhouse, and maybe that annoys them because they have to share space. They have to take somebody's bunk that they don't know, has lived in the bed before them, and that, what if they're dirty, what if they're not? But they still get to be around other people. They get to interact every day with the guys in the bunkhouse, and we find that Crooks doesn't have that opportunity. I'm going to read a little bit further down. And so what I'm going to do is just skip a little bit ahead. Right now, I've finished my little section on 62% in my Kindle app. So if you want to follow along as you're watching this, you can do so. I'm at the bottom of that section where it says Crooks sat on his back, and on his bunk, and I'm gonna pick up there. Crooks sat on his bunk. His shirt was out of his jeans in the back. In one hand, he held a bottle of liniment, and with the other, he rubbed his spine. It's a medicine that you can put on your skin to soothe your skin, liniment. Now and then, he poured a few drops of the liniment into his pink-palmed hand and reached up under his shirt to rub again. He flexed his muscles against his back and shivered. Noiselessly, Lennie appeared in the open doorway and stood there, looking in, his big shoulders nearly filling the opening. For a moment, Crooks did not see him, but on raising his eyes, he stiffened, and a scowl came on his face. His hand came out from under his shirt. Lennie smiled helplessly in an attempt to make friends. Crooks said sharply, "You got no right to come in my room. This here's my room. Nobody got any right in here but me." Lennie gulped, and his smile grew more fawning. "I ain't doing nothing," he said. "Just come to look at my puppy. And I seen your light," he explained. "Well, I got a right to have a light. You go on and get out of my room. I ain't wanted in the bunkhouse, and you ain't wanted in my room." Okay, so when we get to this particular segment, we find out that even though Crooks might be upset that he can't stay in the bunkhouse with other people, this is just an assumption that we make. Maybe it might make him feel lonely, that he has to live by himself and that he doesn't get to live with the other guys because he's black. So somebody comes to visit him, and it says that Lennie smiled in an attempt to make friends. And so you would think, oh, somebody's coming by to stop and say hello. I'm so excited to have you. Come in, guest, and sit down. But that's not the behavior that we see from Crooks. We see him get really upset, saying, "You have no right to be in my room. This here's my room. Ain't nobody got any right to be in here but me." And so we can take that a few ways. We can say, one, Crooks is using this moment to empower himself and show, well, yes, I'm black, and you guys get this little section of the ranch. You get to stay in the bunkhouse, but I get to stay here. And if I say you can't be here, this is mine. You have to get out. And so we can see that he might be using this moment to empower himself. But another way to think about it might be this. Maybe. It's that Crooks has been so used to being alone in his life that now when someone comes to keep him company, he doesn't even know how to react properly because he's so used to being alone. He has grown comfortable in the frustration and the anger and the loneliness that he feels. And when somebody comes to change that, he feels threatened. So I'd like for you to pick up where I left off. We'll really read through and then continue where I left off. And right now I'm on 62%. And so you'll read through that section of chapter 4 and make a decision for yourself. At the end of your notes for this assignment, for chapter 4, there's a question that I want you to answer. I'm just reading the question. It is, how is the theme of loneliness developed in this chapter? So you have an example here of how that theme is developed. One of the specifications of that particular question is that you want to make sure you're providing evidence from the text. So I would advise that you go back and review the very beginning of chapter 4. And remember, it starts off, Crooks, the Negro stable buck. And if you're using your Kindle app, again, we decided that it was around 61%. maybe 60, maybe 62, but somewhere around there, beginning with Crooks, the Negro Stable Book. And you want to use that section, the segment of reading that we just did, to prove a point. How is the theme of loneliness developed? We know one way that loneliness is developed within the character Crooks. I want you to find the best evidence that you can to show that and include it in your response. Okay. Good luck, guys. Look for part 2 of chapter 4 to be coming out very soon. Good night.